Well, I'm going to start off, Ron, where I have been having fun lately. Just it's so curious to me. So in the past, however long, but what if you look at the habits of your day in your health and wellness or relationships or mental or finance or spiritual or in your business or something that you do personally, is there anything specific where you have made, a significant or made an addition or heck, made a deletion or just changed something from the norm?
Oh man, there's so many that I can give you. But
Good.
I'll start off by giving you some context. So I used to work within the corporate world, and working in the corporate world, one of the things that I was really pressured to do is to deliver all the time, be in on meetings, no regard for lunch or personal nutrition in any kind. But while I had that job of working in the corporate world, I was really into racquetball. And so I still am into racquetball a little bit. COVID has taken a hit. Racquetball's taken a hit because of COVID, but I still like to exercise a great deal, especially with racquetball. And so one of the things I started to notice with myself is that how I performed on the racquetball court really was impacted by what I ate for lunch. And at the time, I had no idea that this would be a thing because for me, food was just fuel. Ultimately, just your job was just to give yourself energy so you can crank out more work. And so the quickest thing to do at the time was just to get in my car, go through the McDonald's drive-through, get something really delicious, be back on my desk 20 minutes later, get back to work. And what I started to realize over time, not through an intentional experiment of any kind, it was just kind of like just something that I just happened to notice, is that if I ate crap for lunch, I would lose 3 points on my game when I played singles.
Wow.
And so just realizing that led me to make smarter decisions around food. And now I'm all, it really opened my eyes to the power of nutrition on the way we think, and led me to create a program that is called the Peak Performance Formula. I've now put thousands of people through it. And it starts off with nutrition, talks about sleep, talks about exercise, all of the basic physical needs that we have as individuals that we tend to ignore because work ultimately separates us from our bodily needs, and we neglect them. But often that is the quickest path to elevating your performance, is taking care of your body, not necessarily working harder or even being smarter about your calendar. The more you can take care of your body, the faster you will perform at work.
So what's lunch look like today normally?
Salad, protein, a little bit of carbs. Honestly, it's a well-rounded lunch, but what I avoid are anything fried. I avoid anything really heavy, anything fatty or greasy. I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm like a religious, like it's got to be 3 parts this, 1 part that. I feel like I like to eat good food, and I'm proud of that. I'm not going to change that about myself. But, for example, often it's the fries that get you, it's not the burger. You know what I mean? So it's like those little things. If you can stay away from anything that takes a long time to physically digest, your thinking will not take as much of a hit.
Yeah. So exercise on that front, is racquetball your main go-to, or do you have some other things that you're doing to get yourself moving?
Yeah, so I mentioned COVID. So because of COVID, we have now had to shift to like outdoor sports. So pickleball, I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with pickleball, but pickleball is kind of a sensation now around
Yeah,
the
it
United
is.
States. It is, if you're not familiar with pickleball, it's kind of like if tennis and ping pong had a baby. It might look like pickleball. It's played with a wooden paddle and a wiffle ball, and the court's a little bit smaller than an actual tennis court. The net's a little bit lower. It's very strategic. And that is what my goal is in exercise, is not just to do physical things, but to also do physical things that involve thinking. If you can do both of those things together, I think that the evidence shows is that there's far-reaching benefits that extend beyond just the physical movement. Beyond that, though, I mean, we talked about nutrition. The other thing that I've changed about my habits more recently is in part due to the Apple Watch that I now wear. It allows you to track all these meaningless metrics about yourself, but I'm kind of obsessed with it. And one of the things that I'm really that I track really carefully is my sleep. And one of the things that I have found is that there's a leading indicator that determines the quality of my sleep, and it's not one that I would have thought about prior to me getting an Apple Watch. And that leading indicator is water consumption. So the more water that I consume over the course of the day, within limits, of course, but being really, really hydrated actually improves the amount of deep sleep I get. Now, I don't know if that's true for everyone. It's true for me. And knowing that about myself, I've now started to track the amount of water I consume on my Apple Watch. And by doing that, by hitting my target, people think it's 8 glasses of 8 ounces a day. That's actually a misnomer. The true it depends on the weather. It depends on your weight. It depends on the degree of movement you have. You're a former athlete, so you know this. But most people don't realize it needs to be attuned to you and the level of activity you're doing that particular day. But in my case, if I can hit around 100 ounces of water a day, I tend to sleep much better than if I haven't. And it's because what happens is if you're not fully hydrated, you tend to be lazy. And if you tend to be lazy, you don't exercise. If you don't exercise, that leads to bad sleep. And so that is a leading indicator for me is water consumption.
So interesting. I appreciate hearing the sleep. Real quick, just on the, I'll call it exercise or movement. You talked about something that makes you think. You also have two activities, you talked about racquetball and pickleball, that are social. And they're things that you have to, in essence, you're going to schedule with some other person. Is that just coincidence for you because you just happen to like those? Or is that part of what helps keep you doing those activities?
In my case, it was coincidence because I like the competition. I really enjoy that. The social aspect for me was not the goal, but certainly an unexpected benefit.
Yeah.
And in fact, what research shows is that if you're looking to establish a new routine and you want to keep to that routine, it is far better to involve other people, because then if you don't show up, you're not just letting yourself down, you're letting someone else down. And that often becomes a lot more painful and you're less likely to do it. Beyond that, though, what research tells us is that tennis tends to be one of the best sports you can ever take on. And it's because of that social aspect. And so you're going to show up for the exercise, but meeting new people and creating better friends, that is going to contribute to your health in ways that you might not have anticipated. And so as adults, I think it's really hard for people to make new friends after a certain age. And it's not because maybe it is a little bit because they're boring, but it's in part because our schedules lock us into our routines, and we just are so focused on getting the kids to bed, getting them to their practice. It's really hard to fit friends in. But if you make time for that physical exercise and you meet people around an activity, if you can bond around that activity, the next step is easy. You just have to take them out of that context and take them somewhere else. So basically, if you can go out with your pickleball buddies, or in your case, it might be I don't know if you're still cycling, but whatever it is that you're doing, and invite your sport buddies out for a drink. Now you've taken them out of that original context, and essentially you've created a friend.
Yeah, I'm grateful for social groups I have. I don't have them within my sports and exercise because I go disappear out on a trail in the boonies, riding or running on that. But yeah, I appreciate that. And I know that by far and large, for people, especially if you're struggling with exercise, that is the way to do it. Get with a group. It's creating your own blue zone, as Dan Buettner would say, and get people who are like-minded and help you be accountable and give you some social outlets in there as well. Well, great foray right there then to ask you about the habits that you have in your life that do foster relationships, friends, family, whatnot. Maybe that's it right there. That's one of your answers, is you meet consistently for your sports. So yeah, tell us about what you're doing to foster good habits with relationships.
That's really interesting. It's a great question. One of the things that we've done over COVID, and it's a little bit awkward at the beginning, but it really has sustained itself, is I've got a bunch of friends who don't live near me, and we just schedule lunch over Zoom. And it's it's not the same thing as sitting down and going to a restaurant, but during COVID, you couldn't do that. So it's better than nothing. And in fact, it's a great way of catching up. And that was a practice that I continue to use today. I'm a big fan of it. As far as social relationships, one of the things that I have found has suffered over COVID, I don't know how many of your listeners can relate to this, but my daughter, she's a teenager, she's 14. And I think this is just the age where they just they lose their mind a little bit. And it's really hard to relate when you're not going on vacation together, because that outing of doing something together, ideally physical, really bonds you. And so it was a lesson that we had to learn at the beginning of COVID, but then we just started creating those days where even if it's just like a local outing to a nature walk, but you really need those in order to strengthen your relationship with your children, because you need to be side by side, not necessarily just like parent to child.
Yeah, that was fun. We took our entire clan to the beach this year down in Florida, and the amount of time we spent just out in the water, and we did lots of, fun screwing around stuff and swimming and exploring and whatever, but we spent an amazing time. There's a sandbar kind of out there further where the water's up at your neck, just hanging out, just talking, maybe you find a shell with your foot. And so, yeah, having that experience, but as you said, even a physical one helps, where
Yeah.
there's something that you're doing as opposed to even just sitting there having dinner. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
And I'll tell you, I think people, when they think about vacations, they often think about the location. They say, okay, I want to go to
Yeah.
Florida, I want to go to Turks and Caicos. But a better way to think about vacations is to start by asking yourself, what's the activity I want to be doing? And then work backward to identify the location. Because I think people have this assumption, if I just go to the Caribbean, I'm going to have a great time. What happens when you get to the Caribbean? Maybe you have a great time the first 2 days. By day 3, you're bored. What are you supposed to do? You're just sitting there at the beach, reliving the same day over and over again. You come home from vacation, you don't remember anything about it besides sitting by the pool. But if you can layer in different activities, especially ones that are exciting and involve that physical movement, that's much more likely to recharge you and contribute to better memories.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had one of our favorite couple vacations. We had everybody go to an Airbnb, and somebody mapped out what is it? A Foursquare little court. We spent the majority of the vacation out there playing Foursquare, and we had, guys, so you could have the super competitive stuff and then the little kids doing it. And I felt just kind of goofy. We're not going to Disney World. There's nothing big happening. We're out here with chalk playing Foursquare. Everybody just loved it. So good to hear that from you. How about in the mental arena of just your daily habits? I mean, mental health has never been talked about more than I think it is right now. So as you look at how you strive to keep your mental state and wellness where you want it to be, what are some of the habits around that?
First of all, exercise. So if I don't exercise, that is going to be a really difficult night for me to fall asleep. I
Yeah.
exercise every day for the purposes of sleep. It's not about being in shape or, anything beyond that. It really is an investment in my future performance. That's how I view exercise. And having that reframing was really critical for me, because it was very tempting while I was in the corporate world to just stick around by my computer, answer a few more emails, and just go right to dinner. But now I realize if I don't go to exercise, I'm not going to be my sharpest the next day. And so I don't feel guilty leaving the office to exercise. That's critical. Beyond that, though, what I started doing, which wasn't always part of my routine, but has always played dividends, is first thing I do after breakfast is I don't go to my email. I don't even start working. I read for 20 minutes, usually a business book. And what I have found is, and you can do this, if you're on your way to work listening to a podcast like this, I find that it just elevates your thinking to a higher level, especially if you're reading a book that is one that is about the thing you should be doing, not necessarily the thing you have to do right now.
Yeah.
Just grounds you in that big picture thinking that contributes to better performance throughout the day. So often it really is about the inputs that we put into our brains. And it's not so much about, trying harder or putting in more time, but if you can find the right inputs and habitize them so that you're enjoying them day after day, you're going to reap those rewards over time. And for me, it's just starting with reading.
Well, it reminds me of what you talked about in our first show together, and that aspect of your quote there was, you can't practice harder at something that you haven't considered. And so you're talking about giving yourself input into areas that you haven't considered. I think that's where it's where I get the biggest epiphanies. We all have fun getting confirmation bias, but I'm not learning from that. I'm just, patting myself on the back.
Well, I'll tell you, no, anytime you find yourself thinking, man, I haven't had a good idea in a while, ask yourself, how much reading have you been doing? Because invariably those things correlate with one another.
Yeah.
And it's because ultimately it's not just because of the inputs of the book, but it's the time you spend consuming that information. This is the big secret. This is why I'm not a huge fan of, often you'll see these online summaries of business books. 5 minutes to read the whole book. I mean, what those summaries are leaving out is that the best ideas come in the time you spend reading and reflecting on the information. So it really is more about the time you put toward sitting down, blocking out distractions, and just being fully present for that text. That's where the ideas come from. It's not
Yeah.
from the actual content of the book. And so that's why I think there's almost like a religious aspect to reading that you can't shortcut.
Well, I appreciate you saying that too, because yeah, you're right. If I got the Cliff Notes version of your book, I would not have gotten the thing that I'm going to write about as soon as we stop with this interview, because, I keep talking about it. Prior to this, I just wrote out a new variation, a 2.5-page different version or different perspective on a business idea. And I'm going to go back in there and add what you talked about. And because this is in the healthcare arena, and you talked about it in regards to Tinder and to what they're doing over here from a business model. I thought, wait a minute, that's what we're talking about doing, is helping monitor people, do some of this algorithmic work to then help lead them to a healthier lifestyle that they're not able to figure out on their own. And so I wouldn't have gotten that with the Cliff Notes version. So yeah, it's the musing and the pondering. I'll go back and look at that. I talked about, you'll appreciate this too, when you talked about, daily, lunch as a relationship type thing. I get to sit down most days, 5 days a week, with my buddy Randy, and we sit down and we talk about ideas. And so this lunch, we talked about your book. And I didn't talk about that though, because it didn't totally occur to me till we were talking in the first show. So, all right, good call out there. How about spiritual? I know you're a faith-based guy. So what are some of your habits to bolster the spiritual side of your life, Ron?
I'm not going to have a good answer for this.
Okay, that's good. Good.
And I'll tell you why. I don't consider myself a spiritual guy. I'll give you some background. So I was born in Israel. I came to America when I was 7 years old. My dad got a job at NYU. He was a physician. He knew that his ability to move up in Israel was really limited, really small country, wanted to have more opportunities, came to America, brought us here. I was 7 years old, didn't speak the language, was put in a yeshiva. Now, I don't know if you know what that is. It's a very religious Jewish school. I was not a very religious person. My parents are not religious, but they wanted me to hang around with other Jewish kids. So here I was, double outsider. Outsider doesn't speak the language, speaks with an accent to the extent that he knows any words, and doesn't fit in culturally because doesn't follow the religion as in an orthodox way. And that experience was just like not a good experience, and really I don't want to say it just turned me off to religion in a tremendous way, because I was viewed as not good enough because I wasn't religious. And so for that reason, just was never a religious person. I met my wife in high school. She was the only other non-religious kid in the school. So her parents came from Russia. So I don't know that, I do know from the research that there's a tremendous deal of value that comes from religion and having faith-based groups and people in your life who can help you with all kinds of things and you can relate with. That happens. You meet through church and through synagogue. I was just never one of those people.
So I'm so curious. You have you didn't come here speaking language. You have zero accent in my perspective. That's
right.
That didn't come easy.
I think I think it sets in around 10 is when it's really hard to move that accent. My wife has a little bit of an accent. She came when she was 10. I don't notice it anymore. I actually used to have a Brooklyn accent, and that went away when I came up to Rochester. Maybe I'm just very versatile.
I was wondering, between your upbringing and where you live, how do you talk? I mean, I talk to a lot of people on here, so I usually pick out things, and it's impressive. All right. How about career? And you've, talking about career habits, and you obviously have already talked about, you've had a significant shifts happen within your career. So I don't know how you want to address that. The things that you've done historically, things have obviously changed. So I don't know, you hit it wherever you want to on some of the career business work habits that you rely on.
There's so many different ways I could take this. Here's one way, and hopefully this is valuable to folks, is for a long time, I never considered the idea of starting a business. It was really scary. It was tremendously scary, the idea of working for yourself. And I had this idea that if I worked for myself, that it would be really risky. And what I came to realize when I was working in the corporate world job that I mentioned is that working for someone else can actually be a lot more risky than working for yourself. And it's because I think there's this assumption that if I work for someone else, then all I have to do is do my job and I'll be safe. But the reality is that if the business does really, really well, the owner gets all of the benefits, your salary stays the same. If the business does really, really poorly, then you're out of a job. So the reality is you're taking on all the risk, not the business. And so in my case, I was fortunate enough where I was able to write a book proposal. I got that book proposal. This is for the best place to work. I got that book proposal sold. It didn't make a lot of money, but it was enough for me to quit my job and give it a shot. And the way that I thought about it in terms of justifying this decision for myself was I'm going to take a hit in salary for a year. I'm going to do my best to write the best possible book. And it was really scary for a while because I had no idea what was going to happen. And it was a real significant chance that I would have to go back and take a real job and by working for someone else. And the way that I justified that risk to myself was thinking about not how it felt for me in the moment, because that was not a very comfortable feeling, but by thinking about how would my kids view this portion of my life 20 years from now.
Wow.
And what I realized was that my kids would think, dad gave it a shot, did his best, and I'm proud of that. And even if it didn't work out, he tried. And that was freeing. That's what gave me that ability to take that risk, and it paid off well.
I follow you in that so much, Ron. I've got a bunch of kids, and without a long story there, one of the things that they have testified that's been the most inspirational example in their life is seeing me go after what inspires me. And it was really that brought me to thinking that that's probably what I appreciate most in my childhood too. I got to see that. And so the idea of going after what I cared about, things that mattered to me, that I found purpose in, was just on a silver platter. I got that, and see my kids talk about that, where I'm feeling like kind of guilty, as risking being the provider and going after this thing that I really want to do. And they said, I've got older kids now, and they said that's been one of the most inspiring things they've ever seen. And they love to hear what I'm going after today.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you the inverse of an exercise that was also helpful to me, realizing that it was time to take that risk. And that exercise was, I was thinking about my daughter. She was really young at the time when I was at this job. And I was thinking, if my daughter had this job when she's my age, how would I feel? Would I feel proud of her, or would I feel maybe like she was selling herself short? And for me, she was selling herself short. So that's when I realized I need to make a move. And I think often we get so locked into how something feels in terms of like, is it scary? Is it uncomfortable? That we choose the easier path. And in the process, sell ourselves short. And I think that if you can separate the decision from you, the person, the solution will often appear.
gosh, that's powerful. People can rewind that and listen to that again. There's the worth the price of admission with Ron Friedman on that one, man. And I'll tell you, man, in doing this as long as I've seen one of the best gifts parents can give their kids is to see them going after something. Because I have coached so many people who had parents that didn't. They're the hardest ones to make a step forward because they never were exposed to it. So it's awesome for your daughter. All right, last one here, Ron, is just the personal area of life. And you can put this where you want to. The terms I usually lead with are self-care, but I also want to put in play, fun, hobbies, interests. So far, all I know is racquetball. So tell me what you're doing that inspires you, that you're having fun with.
Trying to think of the best way to answer this. One of the things that I really love to do at some point in my life is write a novel. And this book, the idea of this book that we talked about in the first show, Decoding Greatness, all about reverse engineering great examples. And it is something that I have started to do with movies and books to figure out what is it that resonates with me and how might I apply this formula.
Wow.
And, it's something that I continue to be interested in. I'm not ready to risk it all and spend 2 years of my life writing a book and hoping that it works out. But it is something that I find inspiring because it's it gives me a goal of finding enough financial stability that enables me to go and do that thing. So I'm
Huh.
not someone who thinks, let me just throw 2 years at this and hope that it works out. I feel like you can't, the opportunity cost is too great. But if I can do enough to create the systems necessary to free myself up, to give me the time to pursue that next goal, that's something I can do. So that's the thing that's foremost in my mind right now is how do I create that future that allows me to pursue that goal?
Fun. Anything that you're doing for fun? What's a given weekend and just some activities, you, family, whatever.
Yeah, driving my kids around. That's the answer. Is between t-ball and tennis and piano and dance. If I can get an hour and a half of reading on a weekend, I'm happy. What's the definition of optimism for a parent is walking around with a novel
I know.
on the weekend, because
Yeah.
that is like the idea that you're going to have time to read is often far-fetched. But truly, if I can exercise and I can learn something new and I can be creative in a day, that's a good day.
Beautiful, man. Well, hey, this has been a good day because it's been fun connecting with you. You've got my mind going on some stuff. I'm ready to do some reverse engineering. But thanks for letting us have the behind the scenes look at some of this. I appreciate hearing some of the things you've learned in your habits. Ron, thanks again for being with us.
Truly my pleasure. Thanks so much, Kevin.